Book discussion, Bewilderment by Richard Powers. This is a book about a boy and a father, and it's a fairly simple plot, and it has a almost expected ending. There's a little bit of drama. It's a novel, so it's interesting, it's entertaining. I think Powers is a fantastic writer, one of the most interesting and creative writers that I've come across in recently, to be honest. Because, and here's why: I think he has this very gentle nudging technique where he can move you towards thoughts, even things like political, orientations. Like he can nudge you here and there in a very gentle way. That his other book, The Overstory, is very similar. Look, to be blunt, you could just label him as a sort of eco-liberal political activist, right? You could do that, but he's not, or at least that's not how I would interpret his writing. Powers is a novelist. Powers is a novelist. He is reflecting our times. This is how I would interpret it. So I'm not going to have a political angle towards his writing because that's not how it comes across to me. And it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more artsy, and it's a lot more intelligent. And I think that's just want to say that because some of the content could be misunderstood. I think for new listeners, why are we doing these types of calls, book discussions? The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. This is the fundamental purpose of this podcast. And what we're trying to do here is give people a little bit of maybe give people a little bit of running a hedge fund or starting a hedge fund is like walking on thin ice. So we can't stabilize the ice. We can't prevent people from falling through the cracks, but we can give people maybe a little bit of optimism and hope that it's doable, that maybe some of the things that you might want to think about when you do it, or we just share what we're thinking about. And, just as a caveat, of course, this is not investment advice, so do your own work. This podcast series is meant to help people navigate their lives, and if they're interested in this type of business, then maybe they can learn something from this podcast. And again, book discussions are important because reading is not just a pastime of hedge fund managers, it is the business of hedge fund managers. So it's fundamental, it's important, and that's why we're doing it on a regular basis. This is an Not In Wrong podcast. It's April 10th, 2023. This is Krim Telko. There is no update. There's Easter Monday. Markets are going to open soon, so I'm still in Europe. And for the year, we're up 49.8%. The market is up 8%. We're outperforming by 41.8%. So this is the laydown here. We're talking about Bewilderment by Richard Powers. It's a book about a father and a boy. The boy is an unusual boy. He is diagnosed with a bunch of disorders. It's the problem. One of the themes of the book is if you don't fit into society, how is society treating you? I think this is more of a sideshow. This is not the fundament. This is not a book about children education or about raising a somewhat unusual child or any of that stuff. This is not that kind of book. But it's part of the story, and that's why I mention it, because it's well done. Again, it's a gentle nudge towards thinking that children should be given a chance. I think this is my conclusion. Observations are theory law. And David Deutsch says that, and I think his take children seriously call is very important here, because it shows in this book, you see that you can destroy a child or you can help build a child. You can help build a mental framework for a child that might not have all the prerequisites to function in society, or you can destroy that same child. So that's I think just one of the sort of themes of the story. I think much more important, of course, is it's an environmental activist story. And it's a pretty dramatic environmental activist story because it shows how far people are ready to go. And I think this would be my first takeaway here, is that environmental activism is, I think, a bad problem. It's a bad problem because it's not clear what the problem is you're trying to solve. I had a conversation with one of my friends about that, and I spoke about this a little bit, and I want to reiterate my point that you have this thing called planet anxiety. You have people going all over, particularly in Europe, but also in the US. The whole woke movement is obsessed with the planet. And people are maybe genuinely or disingenuinely obsessed with trying to save the planet. Now, I have a lot of respect for people who want to do something about the planet, but the problem is, what is the problem? You see, that's the key. And this comes across in this book in many ways. And this is what I mean with subtle and deep. I don't think that Richard Powers is trying to send a message here. He's just writing a story. He's a novelist. I don't even know what his political views are. I don't know who he is. I don't know much about him. So my interpretation of this book is that environmental activism, the way it's done in the mainstream academia and the way it's portrayed in mainstream media, is a bad problem because it's not clear what it is and it's not solvable. A good problem is solvable. A bad problem is not solvable. A bad problem is not defined. It's not clear. What is it? So in this particular book, without giving away the plot, dramatic things happen. People destroy their lives. People go to extreme far lengths to try to save something or achieve something in the name of environmental activism that is not in their interest. It's in nobody's interest. So it becomes an empty argument. And that's because it's a bad problem. So I think this would be the first takeaway. And I think, as opposed to Overstory, which in my view, when I read that book, I definitely became more interested in the forests or the Northwest, which was part of that story. And in this case, to be fair, I'm not interested in, I mean, this book has definitely not triggered in me anything more than I'm already interested in sustainability and all those kinds of things. So, but what is sustainability? What does it actually mean? Sustainability means to solve a problem and build a value chain. And the value chain is not just, having a technology and then buying components for that technology. A value chain means building an engineering practice, building technical know-how, developing human capital, which is the most important capital for any kind of endeavor. So those are the kinds of things that, from our point of view, that's what sustainability really means. So it's okay. Sustainability is fundamentally a way to create knowledge, to put humans in the center of, let's say, the environment, and make the environment work for humans, and make the humans also work for the environment. So it has to be a symbiosis, but it has to be clearly defined what it actually means. And let's say we can start with decarbonizing, with defossil fueling. We can have electrification of infrastructure. We can have electrification of infrastructure, electrification of transportation, electrification of heat pumps. Things along those lines are very clear problems that are soluble, and therefore they're good problems. So this would be definitely the first big takeaway. I think the second big takeaway in this book, and this is now a literally technique that I want to talk about, it is the subtle nudging that Richard Powers is using. And I really think he's very good at that. And it's important also for the political discourse. Like, instead of bringing out the, I'm this side of the aisle, I'm that side of the aisle. Instead of that, I'd much rather have people just tell us stories about how they see things. Just tell, I think we humans resonate a lot better with narratives, and Powers is doing a very good job. Now, I know in realpolitik this is probably a little bit difficult to execute, in a sense that you need to get, let's say, make decisions, vote, and things like that. So it's not that simple. But I think saying, well, environmentalists are all crazy, environmentalists are this and that, or the other side, well, we need to save the planet. Like, it is much, much more useful to have a more subtle story about what's going on, and then we can build on that and try to solve problems. Like, for example, in this book, one particular problem that always is being discussed is the extinction of species. And now you can argue that that's not even a problem. In fact, I don't think it's a problem, because species are extinct all the time. So to what extent is the extension of species a problem? Well, it's of course a problem when supply chains get disrupted, when biotopes get disrupted. For example, if we destroy our bees, then we won't have flowers and then we die. So clearly that's a problem, and we don't want bees to be extinct. But we also don't want to be, excuse my French, assholes about this. So if somebody steps on a bee by chance, or even kills a bee because they're scared of it, we're not going to chastise them or cancel them or something. So I think this is what Powers is definitely very good at. He's not canceling anybody. Yes, does he have a certain allegory towards our former President Trump? Yes, he does. And that's okay. And maybe he went a little too far there because it was too obvious. And I think Powers underestimated. This is probably the weak point in the story, where he becomes too partisan for my taste, because he then goes too far on the sort of, well, the President of the United States, which is the allegory is definitely on Trump here. He's let's say, taking power. He doesn't want to have a vote and stuff like that. And he's underestimating U.S. democracy. He's underestimating the checks and balances of the United States. Those are important things. Those are things we shouldn't just throw out in stories and say, if somebody like Trump is president, our country is finished. It's not true. Our country is actually fine. I mean, yes, we have problems, but we have checks and balances. People are, for example, in the case of Trump, he is being put to justice for things he's done, right or wrong, doesn't matter. So I just want to point that out as a weakness within the narrative of the literary art that Powers is definitely exhibiting, which from my point of view, is a very laudable character of Powers. I think the third thing I want to talk about here is this whole concept now of academia, and I think that's also not the main plot, but it's part of the plot. And the way Powers is portraying it, he's basically saying that academia is struggling for funding, that academia is exposed to political meddling, influences, and things along those lines. And I think that's true. And there is a certain problem with that I've also discussed in a sense that I've spoken about Dwight Eisenhower and his warning of the military-industrial complex, and that we could have the same in the academic-industrial complex. So I don't think Powers sees it from that perspective. So here again, I think he's a little bit too partisan in a way that I would say most people that read the story would say, oh, the poor scientists are misunderstood by dumb politicians, and the elite, which is the scientific elite, should be funded without too many questions. Now, I'm not sure, because again, it's a very subtle way that Powers is portraying this. There's a scene in the book where a senator from Texas with a Texas accent, and I listened to the book, so the person that is reading the book does a very good accent there. It comes across as, this dumb guy from Texas is asking these stupid questions. Just give them the money because they're doing good science. Now, I personally, of course, I don't agree with that. Actually, I am very happy that there's these so-called dumb people with funny accents that, if you ask me, are absolutely not dumb, and who cares what accent they have. I want senators and representatives to ask questions, to have those annoying, well, what's this good for? And when are we going to see results? Because science for the sake of science is not something that we should be doing with public money. Science for the sake of science is, I think, an oxymoron. The scientific process is built on a pile of mistakes. The scientific process is the process of inquiry, and that process in its own doesn't need political funding or any funding. It should just be accepted. This is more like saying, well, we sleep 8 hours a day, we eat certain foods. Like, it's a certain way we do things. Whatever we call the scientific method, the scientific process, or whatever we want to call this thing, that's a huge innovation that we came up with throughout the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. So that's massive. Now, the problem that Powers is pointing out here, is that, let's say, scientists, they want to study astrobiology, which is basically life in other planets, or develop models and AI and things along those lines to study if there are indicators, if we can build models that help us understand if there's life on other planets, right? That's a very, I think, useful thing to do. Now, they need billions of dollars worth of investment in telescopes to do that. And here, that's where I am a little bit wary. Why? Because I think science cannot just be done in a way that I have the same problem with the accelerators, let's say SLAC in Stanford or CERN in Geneva, in a sense that you have these huge billion-dollar investments that scientists impose on us. Well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this type of science. Maybe we should be waiting until we're ready. We have the technology. I always come up with the DARPA challenge, which sort of brought out the whole self-driving car industry. And from my point of view, it was the wrong thing to do, because they should have waited until computer vision was, advanced enough, and then, full self-driving, let's say, or self-driving cars would have proliferated more organically. So what I'm trying to say here is that just having these billion-dollar investments, these massive, let's say, telescopes and accelerators, they're, on the one hand, these are not good problems to solve. And the process by which they're being solved is also very unhealthy. We have these massive investments, these huge commitments. Error correction is very difficult, because once you have a telescope that's worth $12 billion or $15 billion and you send it in outer space, well, you can't change your mind. Let's say a new technology comes along, you're going to have this sunk cost fallacy and all of that stuff. So what I'm saying is, the way we do science, it's not written in stone, and science is very political, and science itself is very partisan and all of that stuff, and that's not good. And I wish we could detach science from academia and find better institutions. For example, companies. Companies are good institutions for science, because companies are in the business of developing products and services. And then they align science a lot more with what's actually needed out there to deliver value to customers, which I think from a humanistic perspective is a lot more acceptable than this type of science, this elitist type of science. Again, Power, it's not clear where Power stands here, and this is to his credit. He is very subtle here. He writes this narrative in a sort of, oh, the poor scientists are not getting funding. But he's using the word elitist. He's showing how people are political in the scientific community. And he's showing, for people who know a little bit the environment of the scientific community, I think it's not a big question that this whole process needs a little bit of a revamp. So I think this is very important. So to summarize, Bewilderment by Richard Powers, it's a great book, highly recommended. 3 big points that I take away. Number 1, environmentalism is a bad problem. It's shown in this book. This story shows how when you have a bad problem, bad things happen. And in this case, it's drama around personal drama, but it's just a bad problem in general. and that problem, in a sense, it doesn't have a solution. It's not clear. Number two, with a very subtle narrative technique, Powers enables a very hot political, a political hot potato like environment and science and things like that. He enables that to be, sort of entered into the realm of discussion, which I think is very laudable. And number three, the discussion about science and funding and political involvement with science is a very important discussion, a discussion that we should have. And I think, like everything else, we have to find better ways to do science, because the scientific process, which is a process of inquiry, is something that is very dear to our hearts, should be, of course, because it's the engine that drives our wealth, wealth defined as a set of potential transformation. In other words, it makes things possible for us. It makes life better for us on this planet. And we have to not just protect the scientific process, but also improve like everything else. Thank you.